They were now some distance from the city. Lights still twinkled behind them, but they were more and more moving forward into an unbroken dark. Without any reference, it was impossible to tell if they were moving at all. The train still vibrated and turned side to side occasionally. "I've never been so far from home," the girl said. "I thought Layton was far, but this—" Home, Mitsue thought. He wondered when the word had lost all meaning for him. He pulled the curtain closed. The darkness was wearing on him. "My name is Olivia, by the way," she said. "Olivia Brand. I'm Mitsue Kageda." "You were born in Tsukihaka but raised in Layton?" Olivia asked. "Is that right?" Mitsue nodded. "I came south after the war, after." Memories of the night Sotsu burned flared up against the black canvas of his mind. "Afterwards," he finished bluntly. "I was 6 when I was adopted by a family in Layton. I've lived there ever since." "And that family?" "My adoptive parents passed. First my mother, years ago, then my father about a month ago. I'd been in St. Trinit's since." Olivia crossed her legs. "And now, what will you do now? Can't go back to St. Trinit's." Her eyes unfocused, and she seemed to see the abbey in her memory. "So where are you headed?" "Ignis." Mitsue tilted his palm so she could see the scar of his stigmata. "I'll train to be a kindler if I can. Maybe then I won't feel so guilty," he finished, but this last part he didn't say aloud. "Tell me," she said, "your stigmata. It didn't just appear last night, did it?" Mitsue looked at her. "How did you know that?" Olivia raised her own hand. There, in her palm, the mirror image of his, was her own red-pink stigmata. "Because mine did too." She gave him a long look and then gazed into her hand. "So I'm not the only one," she said thoughtfully. "I had wondered, if it could happen to me, then it could happen to someone else too." Mitsue hadn't even considered the idea. "Do you feel any different?" Olivia asked. Mitsue shook his head. "Me neither." Olivia pulled at the skin. "It's strange, isn't it? When I was 9, the exam revealed a bellkeeper's stigmata, but then this morning I noticed it there, as if I'd always had it." She pressed her palms together. "The kindlers told me to take the train, that it would take me to Ignis, and there I could learn how to become a kindler myself. It's unusual to go after the semester's already started, but then it's unusual for Noctura to appear. I think mostly they didn't know what else to do with me. I couldn't be a bellkeeper anymore, not with this stigmata. My only alternative was to go home and wait for the next semester, but then..." The shadow passed over her eyes. "Who knows when they'll be attacked? I want to be able to help, to fight when the time comes. I don't want to be powerless like I was last night." She unfolded her hands and looked once more at her stigmata, as if seeing through the red window of skin into another world. "Noctura, stigmata," she began slowly. "It almost seems like the two are connected, don't you think? That we should develop stigmata the same night the Noctura return?" She chewed her lips. "It has to be more than coincidence, right? It has to be." She glanced around furtively, as if looking to see if they might be overheard, even though they were alone in the compartment and the rest of the train car was empty. "You ever get the feeling the kindlers aren't telling us the whole truth?" "About what?" "Noctura, stigmata, the sacred fire, any of it. My dad used to have a saying. He'd say," and here she deepened her voice and adopted the twang of Eastern Anglia, "You'd sooner get milk from a bowl than the truth from a kindler." Despite himself, Mitsue chortled. "I've never heard that. We got a whole heap of sayings out east you Western Rushies ain't never heard of." She dropped the accent. "But it's true. Kindlers aren't exactly known for sharing their knowledge. Even the Bellkeeper's oldest books don't explain how the bell towers work. They were built with the aid of the kindlers. That's all they say." "Why would they keep that a secret?" "Think about it this way. The less information they share, the more power they have. Kindlers control everything. The military, the church, the government. Every high position is held by a kindler. They want to keep that power." She lay her elbows on her knees and leaned forward. "There's so much we ordinary people don't know. And now this, what happened with us? How do 2 people without the ability to ignite end up with stigmata? And one of them a hawker at that?" Mitsue shook his head. "It's very suspicious if you ask me. I don't buy that they've told us all they know. There has to be more. Maybe we'll learn the truth in our studies. If not, I'll find out on my own. There has to be something in a book, or I don't know. Whatever the truth is, I'll get to the bottom of it. Like my dad used to say, a rooster will crow in the morning, but it won't serve you eggs at the table. If you want something, sometimes you have to do it yourself." He's full of sayings like that. There's this one. She laughed and looked bashfully at Mitsue. "Sorry, there I go, talking a mile a minute. It's all right, Mitsue said. In truth, he was enjoying their talk. It was his first reprieve since he'd learned about Ray. My dad used to say my mouth would talk a river dry, Olivia laughed. I've always had a problem, but I guess nearly having your tongue cut out really makes you appreciate speaking. Your tongue cut out, Mitsue echoed. Part of the bellkeeper's initiation. I thought they just took a vow of silence. Olivia shook her head. I wish. She stretched and then yawned into her hand. We should probably try to get some sleep, though. I think we're supposed to get there about 8 in the morning. She peeled back the curtain and looked outside. About that, Mitsue said. Where exactly is it we're going? I thought you knew. I thought I did too. I thought there was only the one possibility. The holy city. But all day we've been traveling north and... Oh, there's the tunnel, Olivia exclaimed, pulling the curtain aside from the window. Out of the darkness came floating an island of gas lamps illuminating the mouth of a tunnel that slanted downwards into the ground. Beyond, down a short cliff, Mitsue thought he could see the tips of waves. The ocean. They just completed a second campus, Olivia said, still looking at the window. That's where we're headed. The tunnel, Mitsue asked, knowing already what she was going to say. The Tokai Tunnel. The Tokai Tunnel. Mitsue knew the name only too well. It was seared into his memory. 18 years before, with the blessing of the highest daimyo in Tama, the tunnel's construction had begun. Kindler fire chiseled the rock beneath the gray spire sea. Immigrants from Karenya and Z lay the track. Within 3 years it was completed, 400 miles of undersea tunnel running from Brixton to Tama. As the final steel spike was driven home, Tsukihaka's 300 years of self-imposed isolation ended. So began a new era. Steam engines and machines moved north, powered by an army of Anglian workers. Brick buildings rose, and the sky grew dark with soot, and cement and asphalt crusted the valleys. And the din and stench of automobiles, which were previously unknown in this part of the world, filled the air. Temples were leveled to make room for factories, and shrines that had stood for 1,000 years vanished beneath the foundation of cathedrals. Protests erupted across the country, but when the protests were met with violence, the situation devolved quickly into open conflict. Anglian soldiers moved north, later followed by Kindlers as the fighting escalated. In the summer of the year 998, as marked by the imperial calendar, the capital of Tsukihaka, Sotsu, was razed to the ground. In the aftermath, the shogun commits seppuku, and when word of a planned second attack on the city of Koshira reached Tsukihaka's emperor, he surrendered. As part of the terms of the surrender, the island nation was made a territory of Anglia. The shogunate was dissolved, and the aristocracy, the warrior class known as bushi, or samurai in Anglian, disbanded. The path seemed to open before him. Mitsue swallowed. Where in Tsukihaka? He asked faintly. Sotsu. The room spun. Sotsu. He said the word over and over again in his mind. Of course, he should have known, should have guessed. North. They'd been headed north all day, and it had all seemed familiar because he'd taken this train before, just in the opposite direction. The tracks began to slant downward as they made their approach. The tunnel gaped open like the mouth of a noctura. Darkness leapt up all around them as they plunged underground. Then came the light, thousands of gas lamps lining the tunnel walls, their radiance stretching as the train hurtled past. Mitsue opened and closed his mouth, trying to relieve the crushing pressure in his ears. Is something wrong? Olivia asked. You don't look so well. 400 miles. In 400 miles he'd be there. Mitsue was sinking into an ocean of memory. I'm just tired, he said. Then he drew the shade closed and turned off the lamp. Let's get some sleep. He lay on his back. Home.